Well, good morning once again. Thanks for joining me today. I'm going to spend some time talking about competencies for job coaches and kind of exploring what we're trying to do in Utah in terms of kind of elevating the services that people who provide job coach services to people with disabilities are providing in Utah. Once again, Tim Riesen, I'm from Utah State University. Spent a lot of time thinking about employment and how we just kind of elevate the employment process for people with disabilities. You know, as I was talking yesterday, there's really good reason to really elevate the employment game and really provide solid training for job coaches who actually do this good work. This is important because, you know, the employment rates for people with disabilities, as I showed you all that data yesterday morning, are just really poor. And I think, once again, it's not the employment rates are poor because folks aren't implementing what we know works for individuals with disabilities in terms of providing on-the-job support. So in Utah, we've been really thinking through like how we establish and how we develop competencies for the individuals that are providing these really important on-the-job supports. Now, Utah, like most states, vends with community rehabilitation providers, or the State Office of Rehabilitation vends with community rehabilitation providers to provide job coaching. And I think this probably occurs here in Illinois, right? VR has community rehabilitation providers that they vend with. One of the things that we're seeing with the community rehabilitation providers is turnover is just, I mean, folks can't even keep job coaches on the job, right? So this presents some big problems in the terms of service delivery for supported employment, customized employment, or whatever. So we are really working hard to develop these systems where we can provide competency-based training. And one of the things I'll share with you here in a moment, we're trying to build these train-the-trainer models. So training isn't just incumbent on universities, to provide the training to the job coaches. We're trying to turn it over to the CRPs themselves. So I think that will kind of help with the turnover process, and if we have people that really understand how to facilitate job coaching at the supervisory level, then they can provide that direct training or hands-on training as soon as job coaches get hired at the CRP level. But you know, this is problematic across the country, the direct support professional shortage. And I think this is another contributor to the poor employment outcomes because this work is really hard. So most state agencies vend with CRPs to provide specific training. Now in Utah, we have 3 different levels of training that we provide for job coaches who provide supported employment and customized employment. So the first level of training that we offer, and we all run these trainings all run through Utah State Universities. My staff provide this specific training. The first training is the ACRE training. And do you all do ACRE here in Illinois? Yeah, so it's an approved training program. It kind of creates a national standard for training. And this is a 40-hour training, and it's designed for employment specialists. So with the ACRE training, they go over the gamut of providing employment supports to people with disabilities, starting with assessment, learning how to do good quality assessments, moving into job development, and then providing on-the-job supports. So the ACRE training is it's a 40-hour competency-based training, and it takes quite a bit of time to go through the ACRE training and get people up to speed in terms of providing supports. Now, we also offer what's called the customized employment training. And I know ACRE has a basic customized employment training, and we decided not to go that route. We just wanted to develop our own customized employment training. And this customized employment training, we have a prerequisite that folks have to go through our basic ACRE training, and then they go through an additional 40 hours of training to learn about customized employment. Now, we have these 40-hour learning sessions that folks go through for customized employment. And during this training, participants complete the discovery process with a job seeker. And one of the unique things that we've done in Utah with this specific training is that we have to have a provisional authorization from the State Office of Rehabilitation so the individuals that come through our training have an individual who's going through the discovery, an individual who's receiving VR services. So they're working directly with an individual, so we provide that hands-on experience, right? So we can go through the discovery process. We can help the individual learn about like how to do discovery and how to do it well. We can go through the customized job development process. We can show them how to do informational interviews and engage with employers and so on and so forth. So this training is very unique, and I think it's a pretty effective training. Now, over the years, with my work with the State Office of Rehabilitation and also community rehabilitation providers, they were like, all this training that you all are providing, the ACRE, the customized employment training is really awesome, and it provides these employment specialists the knowledge that they need in order to facilitate employment. But they're like, what about just people who provide on-the-job supports? So they were like, we have a lot of folks that we can't afford to send through a 40-hour training who are just providing on-the-job supports to individuals with disabilities. So they asked, the State Office of Rehabilitation asked me to develop a training, and we called it the Workplace Supports Training, that really just examines what you do when a person is on the job and they need to learn the skills, the essential functions of that specific job, and learn how to engage in the employment setting. So we have a contract with the State Office of Rehabilitation. I've had this contract for the past 5 years, and we train people who just engage in providing on-the-job supports. So this is a hybrid training. 3 hours are online, so they're asynchronous. And the additional 5 hours, or the additional 5 hours are in class, so it's a didactic session where we engage in in-person training and help the individuals and learn about the employment process or the job coaching process. So we spend some time talking about, what is job coaching, how you do job coaching, the differences between like a traditional job coach and an employment specialist and what that looks like. We engage in learning about professionalism in the workplace. My work over the years, at spending time working with job coaches, engaging with employers, this is a big one. Just like helping job coaches understand that when you're job coaching, you're not sitting there on your Twitter or whatever folks, the young kids play with on their phones these days. Just like getting off the phone, looking appropriately, dressing appropriately, how to like not engage in inappropriate behaviors at the workplace for job coaches. And it's amazing that we're teaching these behaviors for specific job coaches. We also get into a job analysis, and I think this is when we move into the live sessions about how you do a job analysis, what a job analysis looks like, how we start identifying the skills that a person would need to do when they're on the job. And so it was really interesting to listen to the employer panel over here, because they were like, we want employees who can do the job. And so it's really important that we teach individuals, especially those with the most significant disabilities, how to do the essential functions of the job. So we spend a lot of time on this job analysis piece. And then we get into systematic instruction. So like how we actually teach skills and how we teach individuals with the most significant disabilities how to acquire these new skills. So we use the systematic instruction approach. So we talk a lot about developing task analysis, using response prompts to teach individuals these new skills. And then we teach individuals how to look for specific accommodations. So these can either be like traditional ADA type accommodations or just simple accommodations to make working a little bit more easy for the individual on the job. So this is how we define a job coach, and in fact, we provide clear distinctions in Utah between an employment specialist and a job coach, and in fact, in the case service manual that the Utah State Office of Rehabilitation utilizes to talk about the services that they offer, they use this definition that we created for a job coach. So a job coach provides training and support to individuals in competitive integrated settings, and they do things like completing task analysis, engage in instructional strategies, do fading support, self-regulation techniques, and identify specific accommodations. Now, one of the things that we're seeing is the most problematic for job coaches is this idea of fading. And what we see with job coaches is that they tend to just want to stay at the job site, and they don't necessarily fade out their supports. And so, you know, the models that we create for employment are designed, you know, supported employment, customized employment, are designed to be ongoing, but we don't want people there all the time. Because what happens when a job coach is always on the job with the individual, the employers start to direct questions to the job coach, not the employee. And the employers don't necessarily take ownership of having that individual being an employee of the business. So we are really working hard to help the job coaches understand how to fade out and fade specific supports for the individual with a disability. So one of the things that we've noticed, and like I said, we've been providing this workplace supports training now for about 5 years, and it's an effective training. We probably train, at least in Utah, upwards of 150 job coaches a year in this for this workplace supports training. For the ACRE training, we train roughly 100 people a year, and the customized employment, the numbers are a little bit lower, around 40 individuals per year. But one of the things that we're learning is that training in and of itself doesn't get the job done. People walk away from training and they're excited about what they're doing, but when they would go back and start doing the work, oftentimes their supervisors would say, "That's fine and dandy. The university's teaching some great skills, but let me tell you how we really do it." And we are finding this to be problematic, and folks were not necessarily implementing the strategies that we know work, that are rooted in evidence. So we are starting to really think through, like, what are the competencies that job coaches need? What do we need to be doing to support these individuals to do their jobs well? So we're really thinking about, like, how we develop a comprehensive training and technical assistance that really facilitates higher order skills and thinking for job coaches. So we want these job coaches to really integrate what we're learning and then go out and implement them. So some of the things that we were seeing that job coaches would do, they would do a task analysis, but they wouldn't do any instruction, right? So a task analysis is a good thing to do to help kind of learn about what an individual needs to do in terms of employment, but they don't have much utility if you're not going to use them for teaching purposes. So we were like, how do we start teaching people to do this work and spending time? So we were like, well, let's start thinking through these competencies. One of the things that we started to play around with, and this really the catalyst for me starting to think through, like, these competencies, as I've been doing some work on self-employment over the past couple of years, thinking about self-employment, and we, with my colleagues from Griffin Hammis and Associates, we were developing proficiencies and competencies for VR counselors to implement self-employment or to utilize self-employment as a service provision from a VR standpoint. So one of the things that we started to play around with is developing these competencies, and we use this Dreyfus model to think it through a little bit more. And we started to think, when we're talking about people learning new skills and engaging in new skills, we're looking at different levels. So we could have a novice professional, a person who's like entry level, who doesn't really know how to do any of this work. We can have somebody who's competent, who knows how to do this work and who can engage and work fairly independently. And then we can have an expert. And so we started to think through, like, how we use these different levels to ensure that people are doing their jobs right, and how do we assess at each one of these levels for a novice, competent, and expert professional. So basically what we did is we went through the curriculum that we developed for the workplace supports training. So we've created a manual that's 100 plus pages long on how you do employment supports for individuals or workplace supports. And so we started to think through, what are the essential knowledge competencies? So based off our curriculum, we boiled it down or narrowed it down to about 24 knowledge-based competencies that we saw were critical to providing on-the-job supports. Now keep in mind, this is just what you do when you're on the job. It doesn't have anything to do with job development, it doesn't have anything to do with assessment. It's just like what you do when you're providing these on-the-job supports. So we distilled down our curriculum to 24 specific knowledge competencies. And so for the knowledge competencies, we assess these through a pre-post measure. So when an individual takes our class or our workplace supports training, they take a pre-test and they take a post-test, and we've developed, that individuals have to pass the knowledge-based competencies at 90% or something along those lines. I can't remember exactly what it is. But then we developed 13 skill-based competencies. So the skill-based competencies are what the individual needs to know in order to do their jobs well. The skills that job coaches need to do when they're on the job. And we started to go through and look at these competencies and identify, operationalize the competencies that job coaches need to do. Here's kind of the framework that we're using from this knowledge base, the novice, competent, and expert stage, and how we kind of operationalize each one of these stages. And I'll post these PowerPoints so you can look at this material on yourself. But like a novice, they need help. Like when they're starting to do their job, they need help doing a task analysis, or they'll need help learning about a job analysis and how you do a job analysis effectively. Competent, they can do stuff pretty independently. You can ask them to go do a task analysis, and they can do it without any support, right? And then an expert individual is somebody who could teach it to somebody else, right? So they can go in and be like, here's how you do a task analysis. Or if you're doing a job analysis, these are the things we start looking at, and these are the questions we start asking employers when we're doing a comprehensive job analysis. So we're using this kind of structure to really kind of develop out our competency-based training. And like I said, our ultimate goal, I have another year and a half left on our contract with vocational rehabilitation for this training. Our ultimate goal is to turn this training over to CRPs so they can provide the training, and then we have some substance that we can use to measure the effectiveness of the work that folks are doing through this kind of scale that we've created. Any questions to this point? No? So we wanted to validate these competencies. So we were like, all right, we've come up with these. We've looked at the literature. We've seen what the literature says folks need to do in terms of competencies. So we did it. We just recently completed a study where we sent out these competencies that we developed to a whole host of job coaches, supervisors, and trainers. So folks who provide either ACRE training or state-specific training. And we are like, are we hitting the mark here, or are we missing the mark? So we really kind of spent some time thinking through this. We developed a whole set of research questions, and whether or not folks believe that our competencies are hitting what they should be hitting, are something that job coaches should be doing. So we looked at these competencies. We sent out our survey to 184 job coaches across the country. The biggest states, or the states with the biggest response rates: Texas, we had 61 job coaches, supervisors, and trainers, 29 from Utah, 28 from Iowa, 25 from Missouri, and we had 4 from Illinois. I'm not sure how people got our survey in Illinois, but folks from Illinois responded to our survey. The largest number of respondents who engaged in our survey or in our validation survey were job coaches, so 57% of our sample were job coaches. 37.8% were supervisors of job coaches. So these are individuals who provide the supervision to job coaches at the CRP level. And then 7.6 were trainers. So we felt like this was a good kind of a sample, a good representation of folks who are providing job coach supports to folks. Most respondents, 77.7% of individuals, had at least one employment-related certification. So we asked folks what they were doing. Basic ACRE, a CE ACRE, or the CESP certification, and I can't remember what CESP stands for, but it's run through APSE, if you all are familiar with APSE. And CESP is just basically a test that folks do. They don't receive specific training, but it's a very comprehensive test that APSE facilitates, and then you can be CESP certified. And then 45 of our respondents had no employment-related training whatsoever. They were providing job coaching, but they weren't trained on any specific acre or anything along those lines. So we sent out our survey. Basically, we listed all of our knowledge-based competencies and all of our skill-based competencies, and we just asked folks to rate them using a Likert scale, whether or not they agreed with these competencies or disagreed with these competencies. Okay, and then we used descriptive statistics, frequency percentages to summarize these data, and we also used an ANOVA, an analysis of variance to assess for differences by position, to see if supervisors thought of these competencies a little bit differently than job coaches, or if trainers thought of these competencies a little bit differently. We did the same thing by training certification as well, okay? So here's a list of our, and I know this is kind of small, like I said, once again, I'll post this information for y'all so you could take a look at them. Here are our knowledge competencies. Everybody scored our knowledge competencies very high. I think the range was, we did a Likert scale from 1 to 5. The average was right around 4.3 or 4.4. So everybody thought each one of these competencies were scored pretty high, and they thought that they were that we were right on par with what folks should understand in terms of providing job coach supports. The same thing for our skill-based competencies, and once again, I think it might be worthwhile to kind of go over some of these skill-based competencies, but these all scored super high. People were like, you're spot on with these competencies that you're developing, and you're going to work with these job coaches. So, you know, the most important competencies that folks identified or agreed with is the professionalism in the workplace. So everybody was saying, this is something that y'all need to address with job coaches, is to ensure that folks are maintaining that professionalism in the workplace. And once again, I think this aligns with what the panel was talking about, and what kind of my previous research is with employers, that if we're going to work effectively with employers, we have to elevate our practices and be professional in the workplace, understand how to engage with businesses more effectively, understand what employers want. The second second highest rated competency was that the job coach communicates with supervisors and others to coordinate supports for individuals. They're like, this level of communication needs to happen in order to provide substantive job coaching. The job coach regularly communicates with the employer and engages with the employer. And so this communication piece is really important to job coaching and spending time engaging with the employer. The job coach completes paperwork. Now in Utah, we have to submit monthly job coach reports. So we're like, you have to understand how to fulfill and complete each one of these monthly job coach reports and send them in on a timely basis. And then we get into the specifics of teaching and providing that direct support to individuals with disabilities. So we're looking at developing appropriate instructional trials to teach individuals how to do specific skills. We're looking at fading those supports. We're looking at developing a specific fading plan, a whole host of different competencies that we're creating. And I'll show you more of how we're utilizing these competencies here momentarily. So we did find some differences in what folks thought about these competencies. So those with an ACRE training or assess certification consistently rating competencies higher than those who didn't have a training, which made sense, right? If you're trained on something, you're going to rate something a little bit higher. So those without any training tended to rate some of the competencies, the skill-based competencies, a little bit lower. The competencies with the most empirical support. So these are things related to like developing instructional plans, utilizing task analysis, utilizing response prompts effectively. These are the ones that we started to see some differences or some variation in responses. So we started to see supervisors were saying that's not really what a job coach should be doing. Trainers were saying that they were a little bit worried about teaching these specific skills. Now, we found this to be very interesting, or at least I did, because one of the things, and just going back to the presentation over here, like employers want people who can do the job and the essential functions of the job effectively. And the way we teach people to learn new skills and acquire new skills is through utilizing task analysis or developing an appropriate task analysis and developing instructional programs using things like least to most prompting or most to least prompting or constant time delay to teach people specific skills. And we started to see differences in what people thought we should be doing. Also, in my work and spending time with employment specialists and job coaches, this is the area where folks really struggle. They don't understand how to develop quality instructional programs to teach the acquisition of new skills. So we saw a little bit of variance here on what folks were thinking. So we know, and I've conducted studies on how to teach people with the most significant skills, utilizing either least to most prompting or most to least prompting, and they're effective. If you do these well, the study that I'm referencing down here, we were teaching folks, they were learning and acquiring complex skills within 5 or 6 instructional trials. So when an individual didn't know how to do a specific skills, we went in and taught them 5 or 6 instructional trials, and they maintained the skill after we stopped instruction. So utilizing these response prompts and instructional techniques is really important to a job coach, and not a lot of job coaches are doing it. So now we're going to start utilizing these competencies to provide targeted technical assistance. So folks will go through our training, spend time in our training, and then we're going to start providing this targeted technical assistance. I'm going to walk you through how we're conceptualizing. I just finished this study that we just completed, and we're starting to create our technical assistance protocol and how we're going to engage with these providers. So we're just starting to implement this and get this going. So I don't have any data on how it's working, but I've got some folks out working with employment specialists and job coaches and CRPs right now to kind of prime the pump, if you will, and get their ideas on how we're going to utilize this information. But we're providing this structured technical assistance to individuals who are at the novice level. So essentially what happens when somebody comes through our training, Hillary, the person who does our workplace supports training, and Amber, I have 2 people that are working on technical assistance. Once they go through the training, a couple weeks after they go through the training, they sit down and meet with the job coach who engaged in the training, and we've developed a technical assistance form that I'll show you here in a minute, and they go through and ask specific questions. How do you feel you can do this? Do you understand how to do a task analysis? What's your comfort level with doing response prompting? What's your comfort level with doing task analysis? And if they say, I don't understand this information, or I don't know, we mark it up, we've got this automated form that we're using. And if they're at the novice level, then Hillary and other members of my team will go out and provide modeling and direct support on how to do some of this stuff at the business. So we're going in and providing that actual support in the business. And we require folks to include documentation about what they're doing and providing these or utilizing these skills. So we have folks, we're going to require folks to include their agency-specific forms, what they need to turn in order for reporting to their agencies, professionalism observations from their supervisor. So we're trying to elevate the job coaching practices. Notes and correspondence with supervisors, completion of employment performance reviews or other agency-specific forms. So we're working through these kind of this documentation process so we can see what folks are doing at the job coach level. We're also kind of looking at developing checklists. So we can go in and see what folks are actually doing when it comes to implementation of something. So for example, one of the documentation elements is the job coach independently completes the steps of a job analysis fidelity checklist independently. So you're all familiar with job analysis and what the function of a job analysis. I think we teach it a little bit differently. So when we're talking about a job analysis, it's a very comprehensive process. So one of the things that we instruct job coaches to do is to go in and conduct this job analysis, and then we ask them to look at things like the core routines that an employee needs to do. So these are the essential functions of the job, these core routines. There's things that need to be done every day you're at the job. And most of the time, that's the only thing job coaches do. They think about those core routines. But what we know about employment are there's other things that happen at jobs. You don't just go and do your core routines every single day, right? So we look at what's called episodic routines and job-related routines as well. And we have folks start thinking through these other things that employees do. So an episodic routine would be something that you do irregularly at your place of business or as an employee. So for an example, an episodic routine, if you're working at a let's just say a pizza shop and you're making pizzas or building pizzas, your primary core job is to make the pepperoni pizza. But every once in a while, you have to fold the pizza boxes, right? So that would be an example of an episodic routine. So we're having folks start identifying all the elements that an individual needs to do in order to maintain that job, right? A work-related routine would be knowing how to sign out when they're taking a break or knowing when to take a break. So we're having folks identify each one of these episodic and core routines. Then we've developed a kind of a fidelity checklist, if you will. So my TA team can go in and start doing observations and seeing how folks are doing on each one of these elements. So this is an example of the job analysis fidelity checklist that we're creating. And this here, we're looking at the job coach determines employment requirements and expectations. So what are those expectations on the job? Are there things that we need to know about in order to ensure that employee is successful? Dress requirements, so on and so forth. Things that we don't think about. Is it okay to swear on the job? Or smoke on the job, or whatever we're looking at, or things that we really need to ensure are happening or not happening. That the job coach goes and provides a job coach tour, or a tour with the owner, so they can start identifying what needs to be done on the job. Completes a job analysis form, so we actually have a standard job analysis form that we're using that allows folks to look at those episodic, allows folks to look at those core routines and the job-related routines. And then in order for somebody to move from novice to competent, they have to pass off each one of these steps. So we're just ensuring that folks are doing what they should be doing on the job. We've done the same things with a task analysis. So we've gone through, looked at the literature, looked at how folks should utilize a task analysis and corresponding instructional programs. And we've created a fidelity checklist that looks very similar to the job analysis checklist. So here it is. This is something that we've created, this task analysis checklist that we develop measurable training objectives. So what we have found in my work with job coaches is oftentimes job coaches do a shoot from the hip kind of approach to training. There's no method to it, right? We just go in and folks would implement training programs and they're kind of, the way they approached it is if we just do things over and over and over again, the employee with a disability will start learning the task. My approach is, well, let's just do it systematically. Let's go in and collect data, see what's happening with the employee, and then teach the skill rapidly, developing a task analysis and using corresponding instructional programs. So once again, we've developed this task list. The job coach developed measurable community-based training objectives. The job coach can describe each discrete teachable step for a task or an activity. So we're operational. These are all the foundational principles of instructional design that I'm probably sure that most teachers in here understand, right? That we can perform the steps of a task analysis, that we can identify the materials and accommodations needed to complete the task, that the job coach can document the speed and accuracy requirements for completing a specific task or routine. So in our mind, this is how we're going to elevate the practices and services for job coaches. Once again, another final piece that's tied to our work is to develop instructional scripts. So oftentimes, for those of you who have worked in the CRP world, people get sick, job coaches don't show up. So we are helping folks develop instructional scripts that folks can utilize for somebody who's filling in, or for, even better yet, for a mentor at the job site to utilize if they're teaching a person a new skill. So we've created these instructional scripts that outline the type of instructional strategies that need to be used, that start to develop a fading plan for individuals so job coaches can kind of slowly fade out of that specific support. So here's the checklist that we're using in terms of providing instructional support. So we're conducting baseline analysis, we're sequencing prompts, we're helping individuals understand what the controlling prompt and the non-controlling prompt, so we can start really providing good quality instruction, and that we utilize the least to most prompting procedures effectively, so on and so forth. This right here is the hardest thing that we're teaching folks. And for whatever reason, folks get really stuck on using response prompts and they don't know how to utilize it effectively. But if you spend time utilizing these checklists and provide that targeted technical assistance, we are seeing that job coaches learn this skill pretty quickly. But it requires targeted technical assistance. They don't maintain it if we just teach it in a classroom-based setting. They need hands-on experience to fully engage in the instructional process. So this is how we're facilitating and using these competencies for specific job coaches. It's a lot of work, and we're requiring CRPs to kind of think a little bit different about providing job coaching. Our preliminary work with these CRPs is they've been a little bit reluctant for us to come in and provide this level of technical assistance because they feel like we're policing them. And it's like we have to build these relationships with the CRPs, and we're starting to get into some of these CRPs, and they're starting to see the utility and the value of this level of support. Because now we're saying, once we get folks to an expert level, you all can start taking ownership of the training. You don't have to come to us, and we charge for trainings too, so they can do the trainings in-house and do them on their own. So we're starting to see this work pan out, and employers or CRPs are slowly starting to buy into this process. I want to show you an example of our technical assistance form, but it's not showing here. Let me see if it'll pull up this way. It's not showing up. Ah, here it is. So we've created, and the good folks who are much smarter than me, who understand how to create Google spreadsheets, what we do is we go through the job coaches who are providing job coach supports, and they go through and provide and do initial interviews, and we mark where folks are on the novice, competent, or expert level, and they'll go through and do an interview. And if they're at the novice level, we start documenting what type of help they need. And they go through each one of these checklists and document, all right, here's where we're running into problems. This is where you need more specific support or targeted support. And we spend time going through there, and then we create basically a TA plan summary that we can go back and send to the supervisors, we send to the job coach, and we provide this targeted technical assistance. So each one of our job coaches that come through our training gets an individualized technical assistance plan to provide specific job coaching. So this takes a little bit of coordination, and you have to have staff to do it. But I think, in order to really elevate these job coaching practices, this is what we need to be doing. And other practices do this. I mean, you wouldn't expect any other profession to do their job without some form of competency. And that's what we're trying to build in Utah, is like, we need to elevate the profession. I'm also a strong advocate for tying pay raises to job coaches who are at an expert level. Right now, there's no incentive for job coaches to stay in this field and do the really hard work that's required to provide job coaching support. So I'm actively working with our state folks to say if we can get people to an elevated practice, there has to be an incentive for folks to stay in this field. They do it with other professionals. Why not job coaching? It could perhaps help people not turn over so frequently in job coaching. So that's how we've developed job coaching competencies in Utah.